Scene 1. The forest was never truly silent. Even when the night pressed down heavy and cold, when the stars hid behind the thick clouds, the woods still breathed. Branches swayed with the slow groan of old trees, and unseen things moved through the undergrowth, whispering to one another in voices too soft for human ears. Somewhere, far beyond the visible dark, an owl cried, long, low, and hollow, as if warning something deeper in the night, not to wake. At the edge of those woods, there stood a house that looked as if it had grown out of the forest itself. Its walls were made from rough-hewn logs, blackened with age and rain. Moss crept up the stones that formed its base, and the roof sagged beneath the weight of years of fallen leaves. No one in town remembered exactly when the house had been built. It had simply always been there, as if the forest had decided, long ago, to keep two of its own. Inside that house lived an old man and his wife. The locals, when they spoke of them at all, called them the woodsfolk. They had no names anyone could recall. The old man was tall and lean, his shoulders bent from decades of chopping wood. His beard was the color of dirty snow, and his eyes were the faded blue of frozen water. The woman was smaller, her back curved like a branch under too much frost. Her hands were always busy, weaving, stirring, mending, or simply trembling in the dim light of their lantern. No one came to visit them. The nearest road was half a mile away, the nearest town 5. The old couple lived as though time had forgotten them, or perhaps spared them. Each morning, smoke would rise from their chimney, and by night, the faint orange glow of a fire could be seen flickering through the cracks in the wooden walls. But lately, something had changed in that light. It flickered longer than it should. Sometimes it went out entirely, leaving the forest in complete darkness for nights on end. The first strange thing happened one autumn evening. The sun had barely disappeared behind the hills when the old man came back from the woods, carrying his usual bundle of dry branches. But when he reached the door, he stopped. There were footprints in the mud, small barefoot prints, too small for a man, too wide for an animal. They circled the house twice before disappearing toward the trees. He said nothing to his wife. He simply wiped his boots, stepped inside, and bolted the door. That night, the forest was louder than usual. The wind howled through the gaps in the shutters, making the fire jump and twist. The old woman sat by the hearth, staring at the flames. Her eyes were clouded, but she could still feel something in the air, something watching. The old man busied himself with sharpening his knife. The rhythmic scrape of steel against stone filling the silence between gusts of wind. Around midnight, the noises began. At first, it was a faint tapping, like rain on the roof. Then, a dragging sound, something heavy being pulled across the porch. The old man stood still, his knife paused mid-air. The woman turned her head toward the sound, her lips parting as if to speak, but no words came. The dragging stopped. Then came a slow, deliberate knock. 3 times, the old man whispered, "Stay here," and rose from his chair. The firelight stretched his shadow across the walls as he walked to the door. He listened. Nothing but the wind and the faint hiss of the fire behind him. Slowly, he unlatched the lock and opened the door a crack. Cold air rushed in, carrying the smell of wet earth. The porch was empty. The trees loomed like black towers beyond the clearing, their branches swaying like arms in the dark. He stepped out, his eyes searching the shadows. Then he saw it, just at the edge of the tree line, a figure. Small, still, standing too straight, too silent. He squinted. The shape looked like a child, but its skin was pale as the moon, and its eyes reflected the firelight in a way no human eyes should. He took a step forward, heart pounding, but the figure turned and vanished into the trees. He stood there for what felt like minutes, listening to the sound of retreating footsteps that weren't quite right to slow, too uneven, like something dragging itself along. When he finally came back inside, the old woman hadn't moved. Her eyes were still on the fire. What was it? She asked, her voice barely more than a whisper. Nothing, he said, closing the door behind him. Just the wind. But that night, neither of them slept. The next morning, the forest felt wrong. The air was colder, thicker, as if it carried something heavy and unseen. Birds didn't sing. The trees seemed to lean closer. The old man went out as usual, axe in hand, but the deeper he went, the quieter it became. Even the crunch of leaves beneath his boots sounded muffled, swallowed by the stillness. He found his usual clearing and raised his axe. But then he saw it again. A footprint, small, barefoot, pressed deep into the soil, as if whoever left it had been standing there for a long, long time. He looked around, no one, just the forest watching. He turned back to his work, forcing his mind to stay focused. But with every swing of the axe, the trees seemed to echo the sound back at him, louder, closer, like something mimicking him from the shadows. When he returned home that evening, his wife was sitting outside, her hands clenched in her lap. You went into the woods, she said. He frowned. I always do. No. Her voice was trembling now. Not today. You weren't supposed to. He stared at her, confused. What are you talking about? Her eyes lifted slowly to meet his. I heard them. They called your name. He froze. Who did? The ones from the trees. Her voice cracked on the last word. She began to shake, her thin shoulders trembling under her shawl. He reached out to steady her, but she flinched away. They know you went in, she whispered. They always know. That night, the knocking came again. Louder this time. Not 3 knocks, 7. Then silence. Then something scraping against the wall, slow and deliberate, circling the house. The old man held his breath, his hand gripping the knife. The woman began to mutter something under her breath, old words, old prayers, half forgotten from her childhood. The scraping stopped near the window. They could both hear it breathing now. Not animal, not human, just breathing. A long, drawn-out sound, like air being pulled through a throat that hadn't used breath in years. Then, a voice, low, rough, whispering from outside the window, "Let me." In the old man's heart pounded so hard it hurt. He stepped closer to the window, raising the knife. The voice came again, closer now. Please, it's cold. It sounded like a child, but not quite. The tone was wrong, the rhythm strange, words stretched too far, as if it was learning how to speak. The old woman covered her ears and began to cry softly. "Don't listen," she hissed. "If you listen, it finds a way in." But he couldn't help it. He stood there, staring at the window. The faint outline of a face pressed against the glass, pale, expressionless, its eyes black and wide, reflecting the firelight like two holes in the world. He stumbled back, knocking over a chair. The noise broke the spell. The thing outside hissed, not like a person, but like air, escaping from something hollow, and then it was gone. The forest swallowed the sound, and the house went still again. Neither of them spoke until dawn. When the sun finally rose, it brought no warmth. The light felt thin, washed out, as if the forest refused to let it through. The old man sat by the window, watching the tree line, his eyes hollow from lack of sleep. The woman moved quietly around the house, avoiding the windows. She didn't eat. She didn't speak. She only stopped once, by the fire, and whispered, "They know you saw it." He didn't answer. He just stared at the woods, at the place where the footprints led, and wondered how far curiosity could go, before it turned into something else. That night, when the fire burned low and the shadows stretched long across the floor, the knocking began again. Only this time. It came from inside the house. Seen to the sound came from somewhere deep inside the house, deliberate, as if the wood itself were knocking back at them. 3 knocks. Then a pause. 2 more. The fire in the hearth hissed as a draft swept through the room, curling the smoke into thin, ghostly ribbons that drifted toward the hallway. The old man rose slowly from his chair. Every bone in his knees cracked as he stood, and the noise seemed far too loud in the stillness. He held the knife tighter. The old woman whispered without looking at him, "Don't open any doors." Her voice was faint, like a memory echoing in another room. He took 1 step toward the hallway anyway. The corridor beyond the main room was narrow, lined with faded wallpaper that had long since peeled away in strips. The air smelled of damp earth and ashes. His own shadow seemed to lag behind him, bending along the warped floorboards. Again knock. Knock. Knock from somewhere ahead. He thought it came from the pantry. But then it shifted, moving left, then right, as if whatever made the noise was crawling inside the walls. He reached the pantry door. It was slightly open. The darkness beyond it looked thick enough to touch. He whispered into the crack, "Who's there?" Silence. Then a faint, rhythmic breathing, slow, wet, unsteady. He stepped back, heart hammering, and slammed the door shut. The sound echoed through the house like a gunshot. The old woman flinched by the fire. "What did you hear?" she asked. "Nothing that belongs here," he said. The rest of the night passed in fragments. The fire dying, the wind howling, the house settling in sighs and creaks. When dawn came, it was gray and hollow. The forest outside was hidden behind mist that pressed against the windows like fogged glass. Even the birds had stopped moving. He tried to go about his morning tasks, fetching water, chopping wood, but the woods refused him. The axe felt heavier. The path he had walked for years seemed unfamiliar, winding where it never had before. When he looked back toward the cabin, he couldn't see it. He turned in a slow circle, breath quickening. The mist thickened around him. A shape moved within it, something tall and thin, walking between the trees. He thought it was just the fog twisting, until he heard the crunch of leaves. Then another, then a whisper, close to his ear. Why did you close the door? He spun around, swinging the axe blindly. The blade met nothing but air. The whisper faded, replaced by the echo of his own ragged breathing. He stumbled back toward where he thought the cabin should be. Every step seemed wrong. Every direction uncertain. When he finally saw the outline of the roof through the mist, relief hit him like a wave. But as he got closer, he saw something that made him freeze. There were handprints, hundreds of them smeared across the windows, pale and greasy, as if pressed there from the inside. He called out for his wife. No answer. He ran to the door, burst inside. The fire was out. The air was thick and cold. She sat in the chair by the hearth, motionless, eyes fixed on the ashes. Her hands were clasped so tightly together that the skin had gone white. Mary. He said her name slipped out before he even realized he hadn't spoken it in years. Her lips moved, barely. There in the walls. He stared at her, not sure he'd heard right. What? She pointed one trembling finger toward the ceiling. He looked up. Between the wooden beams, something shifted. Boards bowed slightly, dust drifting down like gray snow. Then came the faint sound again, knocking, scratching, a slow crawl that moved overhead, down the walls, closer to the floor. He stepped back. The knife trembled in his hand. From behind the pantry door came a soft, childish giggle. The woman whispered, "It knows your name now." The door creaked open by itself. Nothing but darkness inside. Yet the smell that came out was wrong, rot and wet leaves, mixed with something sweet, almost like decay. He leaned forward, trying to see. Two small, pale hands reached out of the darkness and gripped the doorframe. He fell backward, shouting, as a shape began to emerge, impossibly, crawling on all fours. It was small, like a child, but too thin, its skin stretched tight, its movements jerky, puppet-like. Its eyes were black pits that swallowed the firelight whole. The old woman screamed a raw, animal sound and the creature froze, head twitching toward her. The man grabbed a burning log from the fireplace and hurled it. Sparks exploded across the floor. The thing recoiled into the pantry, hissing like steam. He slammed the door again and held it shut, heart thundering. From the other side came whispering. Not one voice, many. They whispered in unison, repeating the same words over and over. You heard it. You saw it. Now you belong. The sound swelled until it filled the whole house. The windows rattled. The walls groaned. Then, as suddenly as it began, silence. Hours passed before either of them moved. When they did, it was slow, mechanical, as if afraid the air itself might break. By afternoon, The woman was muttering to herself again, threading small bundles of herbs together with twine. He asked what she was doing. Keeping them out, she said. They come when the forest forgets you. The moment you stop hearing its heart, it replaces you. Asterisk, he didn't understand, but he didn't argue. That night, he placed the herb bundles at every door and window, the smell of sage and pine thick in the air. He sat awake by the dying fire, watching the shadows crawl across the walls. Asterisk, sometime after midnight. A faint tapping returned this time from the floor beneath his feet. Tap, pause, asterisk, tap, tap. Asterisk, it moved under the boards, crossing from one end of the room to the other. Then it stopped right beneath his chair. Asterisk, he held his breath. The floorboards bulged slightly. A whisper rose from below. Asterisk, too late to keep us out. Asterisk, he leaped up, pulling the chair back. The boards cracked, a long line splitting across the floor. Cold air rushed up through it. Beneath, in the dark space of the crawl hole, he saw something staring back, eyes glinting, wide, unblinking. Then fingers, dozens of them, pressing through the cracks, scraping the wood as if trying to climb out. Asterisk, he ran to wake his wife, but she was already standing in the doorway, eyes unfocused. Head tilted. Asterisk, they've been waiting, she said softly. Since before we came here. Asterisk, the boards burst apart. A shape rose from the hole, then another, each twisted in a different way, some crawling, some dragging half-formed limbs. They moved without sound, except for the faint rustle of dry leaves that fell from their bodies as they advanced. Asterisk, the old man swung the axe wildly, striking one across the shoulder. It fell but didn't bleed, just split open, spilling more darkness. The others hesitated, then receded slightly, like smoke pulling away from flame. He dragged his wife toward the door. Asterisk, when he opened it, the forest outside was no longer it was alive, branches shifting, trunks bending, shapes moving just beyond sight. The air pulsed with whispers. He felt them not through his ears but inside his skull. Asterisk, run. The word formed, though no mouth had spoken it. They ran. Branches tore at their clothes. The ground sucked at their feet. Behind them, the cabin groaned, collapsing in on itself with a thunderous crack, as though the forest were swallowing it whole. He looked back once and saw the roof sinking, the walls twisting inward, light vanishing as if consumed by the earth. Asterisk. They didn't stop until they reached the river, a dark ribbon of water cutting through the trees. The woman collapsed to her knees, gasping. He dropped the axe, hands shaking. Asterisk, we can't go back, she said. Asterisk, he nodded, staring at the water. Asterisk, in its surface, moonlight shimmered on, then broke, rippling outward. A reflection appeared beside theirs. A small, pale face, smiling. Asterisk, the old man reached out without thinking, fingertips brushing the cold water. The smile widened. The river began to move against its current. He stumbled backward, pulling her away. But the reflection stayed where it was, lips moving soundlessly. Then he realized it wasn't mouthing nonsense. It was counting. Asterisk, 1, 2, 3. Asterisk, the sound of knocking came again. Not from the forest. Not from the house that no longer stood. Asterisk, it came from the ground beneath them. muffled by earth and roots, and it was counting with the reflection. 4, 5, 6. Asterisk, he pulled her up, desperate, stumbling through the trees. Every shadow seemed to follow. Every rustle whispered their names. The deeper they went, the less real the forest felt, the trees taller, darker, older than they'd ever been. Asterisk, at last. They saw a faint orange glow ahead. A road, a passing truck. Civilization, he shouted, waving his arms. The truck slowed, brakes, squealing. Asterisk, the driver leaned out. A middle-aged man with a cigarette hanging from his lips. Asterisk, Jesus, you folks okay? You look like hell. Asterisk, the old man tried to speak, but the words stuck in his throat. The driver looked past him, toward the trees. Asterisk, you come from that way? He asked. The old man nodded. The driver frowned. Ain't nothing down there but the old Miller place. Burned down last night. The old man froze. What did you say? Asterisk, the driver spat smoke into the dirt. Yeah, whole cabin went up. Sheriff said nobody lived there for years. Asterisk, the old woman began to shake, her voice small and hoarse. No, we were just there. Asterisk, the driver blinked at her, puzzled. Ma'am, that place's been abandoned since before I was born. The old man turned toward the forest, through the gaps in the trees. He thought he saw faint lights, moving lanterns maybe, or eyes. The wind carried a whisper that brushed against his ear, gentle as breath. Asterisk 7. Asterisk, he didn't look back again. Scene 3. The old man and his wife stumbled along the dark road, their breaths ragged, hearts pounding as if each beat could summon whatever had followed them from the forest. The moon hung low and thick behind the clouds, casting a pale gray light that barely illuminated the cracked asphalt. The air smelled of wet earth and smoke, a lingering reminder of the cabin that no longer existed. Asterisk, the road twisted unexpectedly. Trees leaned over it like skeletal arms, casting long, jagged shadows that seemed to move as they walked. Each step they took crunched against gravel and loose stones, echoing too loudly in the oppressive silence. It was as if the forest itself were pressing down, shrinking the space around them. Asterisk, did you hear that? The woman whispered, clutching her husband's arm. Her fingers dug into his sleeve so hard he felt the fabric cut into his skin. Asterisk, nothing, he said, though the doubt in his voice betrayed him. Asterisk, a sudden rustle from the woods on their left made them both jump. A low, wet sound, a dragging followed by a faint, high-pitched giggle. The sound was wrong, disjointed, echoing unnaturally through the trees. The woman stumbled backward. Asterisk, stay close, the old man muttered. Don't look away. Asterisk, they walked faster, feet dragging against the asphalt as adrenaline surged through their veins. For hours, or perhaps minutes, the sky offered no indication of time. The road seemed endless. Each bend revealed nothing but more darkness, more trees leaning closer, and shadows that didn't belong. Asterisk, then, in the distance, a dim light appeared. At first, they thought it was a house, maybe a farmhouse, a safe haven. But as they got closer, the glow resolved into something far more unnatural. A small makeshift structure stood in a clearing, a shack of rough timber, patched with rusted metal and old boards. A single lantern hung from a crooked nail, swaying lightly despite the still air. Asterisk, the old man approached cautiously. He could hear the wine door. Was it a whisper? Carrying words he couldn't make out. Each step brought a sensation of being watched. Every shadow seemed to stretch toward him. Asterisk, the shack door creaked open slowly, as if inviting them inside. Inside, the air was heavy and pungent with the smell of rotting wood and damp moss. The light from the lantern flickered across walls covered in symbols carved deeply into the wood lines. Circles, jagged marks that formed shapes he had never seen before. Asterisk, this doesn't feel right, the woman said, her voice trembling. Asterisk, he nodded, but pushed forward, compelled by something he couldn't name. Inside, the shack floor was littered with objects, twisted sticks, small animal skulls, and scraps of cloth tied into knots. It reeked of something earthy and old, the smell thick enough to choke. Asterisk, from the corner, a small figure emerged. At first, he thought it was a child, hunched and silent. Its face was hidden beneath a hood made of fur and leaves. The old man stepped back instinctively, gripping the axe he had carried all this time. Asterisk, who's there? He demanded. Asterisk, the figure didn't speak. It simply moved closer, limping slightly as if one leg were shorter than the other. Its eyes glinted in the lantern light black, reflective and impossible to read. Asterisk, suddenly, the figure lunged forward, disappearing behind a wall of hanging herbs and dried plants. A scraping sound followed, slow and deliberate. The old man swung his axe blindly, connecting with nothing but air. Asterisk, a voice whispered from the shadows, soft, like dry leaves brushing against each other. Asterisk, you shouldn't have left. Asterisk, the woman screamed. Her hand flew to her mouth, stifling the sound, but her eyes were fixed on the corner where the figure had vanished. Asterisk, it's just a person. The old man tried to convince himself. His voice shook. Someone lost. That's all. Asterisk, the lantern flickered violently, casting the shadows of the carvings onto the walls like writhing creatures. The air grew colder, thick with a wet, metallic smell. Then, from behind the stacked objects, the figure reappeared. Its arms were twisted in ways they shouldn't be, elbows bent backward, fingers elongated unnaturally. Its head tilted too far to one side, and its eyes glowed faintly, reflecting the firelight of the lantern. Asterisk, the old man swung again, but the creature darted aside impossibly fast. He could hear it laughing now, wet, gurgling sound that seemed to come from inside his chest rather than from its mouth. Asterisk, the woman grabbed his arm. We have to go now. Asterisk, they turned to leave, but the door had vanished. The wall stood solid where the entrance had been moments before. Panic surged. They ran along the walls, trying to find a way out. Every surface seemed to shift slightly under their hands, as if the shack itself were alive and reshaping to trap them. Asterisk, from somewhere above, the whispering grew louder. Not one voice this time, but many, overlapping and echoing. Asterisk, you belong here. You cannot leave. You cannot leave. Asterisk, the old man's heart pounded. He tried to pick up a piece of wood as a weapon, but it dissolved in his hands into black mist. His wife screamed and clutched him tightly. A shadow fell across the floor in front of them. Slowly, It took 4 multiple small figures emerging from the corners, crawling out of the walls. They were pale, thin, with limbs too long and faces too small. Their eyes reflected the lantern, wide and unblinking, and they moved with a jerky, unnatural rhythm. Asterisk, the old man swung his fists, striking one across the shoulder. It passed right through, leaving only a chill in the air. Another touched his leg. He fell to his knees. The whispers rose into a crescendo, overwhelming and deafening. Asterisk, the woman tried to pull him up, but unseen hands seemed to clutch at her as well. The floor beneath them groaned and buckled, as if the shack were sinking into some deep pit below. Asterisk, desperate, he shouted, "Run, run!" Asterisk, they scrambled toward what they thought was the door. But the structure kept shifting, extending longer than it should, the ceiling lower than before. The figures multiplied, pressing closer, whispering louder. Asterisk, and then, from the center of the room, a taller shape emerged, a silhouette that dwarfed the others. Its face was hidden beneath a mass of tangled hair, limbs twisting unnaturally, yet moving with terrifying purpose. It raised its hands, and the smaller creatures recoiled slightly. Asterisk, it spoke, voice deep, rumbling through the walls. Asterisk, you walked into our forest. You walked into our house. Now, you must stay. Asterisk, the old man swung at it with his last ounce of strength. The figure didn't flinch. The axe passed through the air, meeting no resistance. Asterisk, the shack trembled. Dust and debris fell from the ceiling. The lanterns flickered and went out. Total darkness swallowed them. Asterisk, in the pitch black, he felt something brush against his face, wet and cold. The whispers surrounded them, countless voices, chanting, Asterisk, you belong. You belong. You belong. Asterisk, they ran blindly through the dark, hands outstretched, limbs tripping over unseen objects. Something caught his ankle, a thin, strong grip. He stumbled, falling hard, scraping his skin against the wooden floor. Asterisk, the woman screamed, a sound that echoed off the walls. He heard her being pulled away. Just for a moment, before her hand closed in his, tugging him up. Asterisk, through sheer panic, they pressed forward, feeling walls on either side that seemed to breathe, pulsing as if alive. Asterisk, and then light. A faint glow, growing stronger. A door. Real, solid. The old man reached for it, yanking it open. Asterisk, outside, the forest was calm. Mist hung over the ground. No figures, no whispers. Only the faint rustling of wind through leaves. Asterisk, they collapsed onto the damp grass, gasping, trembling. Their hearts still raced, and the air tasted of iron. Asterisk, the old man looked back at the shack. It was gone. In its place, only a clearing remained, the trees untouched, the ground level. It was as if the structure had never existed. The woman shivered, voice small and broken. Was it real? Asterisk, he didn't answer. He didn't need to. They knew, deep down, that something from that place would always follow them. That forest, that house, those eyes, they were patient, waiting. Asterisk, and though the road led them back toward civilization, the memory of the whispers, the hands, the black-eyed figures, stayed with them. Asterisk, at the river they had passed earlier, they stopped to drink. The water was cold, black, reflecting the night sky. The old man reached out, fingertips grazing the surface. For a brief moment, he thought he saw shapes moving beneath the water, pale and watching. Asterisk, he pulled his hand back quickly. The woman clutched his arm. "We'll never be safe," she whispered. He nodded. But neither spoke further. Their eyes stayed on the dark forest in the distance, knowing that something would always be waiting at the edge, ready to count once more. Asterisk, the wind rose again, carrying faint voices that blended with the night. Asterisk 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Asterisk, and they kept walking toward the lights of the distant town, unaware that with each step, the forest watched, patient and eternal. Seen for Asterisk, the lights of the town appeared like a fragile promise on the horizon, faint and flickering through the thick night air. A few scattered street lamps glowed weakly along cracked roads, their illumination struggling against the heavy darkness pressing in from the surrounding woods. The old man and his wife moved cautiously, bodies stiff and limbs trembling from exhaustion. Their breaths came in shallow gasps, hearts hammering in rhythm with every rustle in the shadows behind them. Asterisk this feels different, the woman said, gripping his arm tightly. Her knuckles were white, and her eyes darted nervously to every corner of the dark streets. The forest? It's following us? Asterisk, he didn't answer immediately. He kept his eyes on the road, straining to distinguish the faint shapes between lamplight and shadow. Every tree lining the outskirts of the town seemed unnaturally tall, black, looming, leaning toward them as if trying to stretch out into the streets. The wind whispered, carrying faint echoes of the counting that had haunted them. Asterisk 1, 2, 3, 4. Asterisk, he forced a steadying breath. We'll be safe once we reach people. Once we find someone awake. Asterisk, but the town was nearly deserted. Houses sat dark, curtains drawn tight, cars parked like abandoned shells along empty streets. The faint hum of electricity from a distant lamp flickered in the distance. But beyond that, silence. Asterisk, they approached a small diner, its neon sign buzzing intermittently, open 24 hours. The old woman exhaled slowly, hope flickering. They pushed open the door, and a bell rang. Inside, the diner was warm, smells of coffee and fried food filling the air. A single man stood behind the counter, wiping cups with a rag. Asterisk, can I help you folks? He asked, voice tired but friendly. Asterisk, the old man opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. He shook his head instead, nodding toward his wife, who was trembling violently. Asterisk, sit down. Sit down, please, the man said, motioning toward a booth by the window. They obeyed instinctively. Asterisk, as they sank into the worn seats, the old man scanned the diner. Other than the counterman, there were no patrons. He noticed a calendar on the wall. October, the pages slightly yellowed. Time seemed to move strangely here. The clock above the door ticked slowly, almost dragging each second like molasses. Asterisk, coffee? The man asked, eyes lingering on them a moment longer than expected. Asterisk, yes, please, the old woman whispered. Asterisk, the man poured black coffee, steam curling, like ghostly fingers above the mugs. He set one before each of them. "You folks look like you've been through hell," he said gently. "Where are you coming from?" Asterisk, the old man's hand trembled as he took the mug. "From the forest," he said finally. Asterisk, the man's face didn't change, didn't show surprise or curiosity. He just nodded. "Forest's been quiet lately, mostly, but some things don't stay quiet forever." Asterisk, the words made the old man shiver. Quiet. There were things. They're watching, waiting, counting. They tried to get us. Asterisk, the diner man leaned on the counter, looking away briefly. "You saw them, huh?" His tone wasn't mocking. It was tired. Like he had expected this. Maybe even hoped not to see it happen again. Asterisk, they were monsters, the woman whispered. Small, pale, their eyes black. They move like nothing human. Asterisk, the man nodded slowly. Forest has its own rules. Things that live there, they don't think like we do. They don't stop. And they remember every step you take. Every footprint you leave. You can run from them, but you can't hide. Not really. Asterisk, the old man gripped the edge of the table, knuckles white. Then what? What do we do? Asterisk, the man's eyes flickered to the window, toward the dark tree line just beyond the town limits. You survive. That's it. You keep moving. You don't sleep in the open. You don't look back. And you never let them know you're afraid. Asterisk, the words hung in the air, heavy as lead. Outside, a wind stirred, and the trees at the edge of town bent toward the street in a way that seemed impossible, unnatural. The whispers returned, faint but distinct, carried on the cold night air. Asterisk. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Asterisk, the woman clutched her mug tightly, spilling coffee onto the table. They're here, she whispered. They followed us? Asterisk, the man behind the counter didn't flinch. Of course they did. Forest doesn't let go of what it claims. But you're in town now. For tonight, they won't touch you. Mostly. Asterisk, the old man tried to stand, to thank the man, to ask more questions. But the feeling of being watched weighed too heavily on him. Something in the corner of the diner caught his attention, a shadow, moving against the light. Not human. Too small, too quick. He blinked, and it vanished. Asterisk, outside, the wind picked up. The trees groaned. A low, dragging sound echoed from the road leading back to the forest. It was slow, deliberate, unmistakable. Footsteps, counting again, asterisk. 6, 8. Asterisk, the old woman gasped, covering her ears. They're here, she whispered frantically. They're counting. Asterisk, the diner man looked past her toward the window, his expression tight. Don't let them see you scared. That's all I can tell you. Don't look out there for long. Keep your focus here. For tonight, that's enough. Asterisk, they sat, trying to steady their breathing. Every creak of the floor, every gust of wind, made their nerves fray tighter. The old man stared into his coffee, imagining the small black-eyed figures pressing against the glass, scraping at the walls, waiting for the moment to claim them. Asterisk, hours passed. The lights of the diner flickered. The old woman leaned against him, shivering, whispering prayers he didn't understand. The man behind the counter moved quietly, preparing meals for imaginary patrons. It was as if the diner existed in a space untouched by time, a small island of warmth and normalcy in the endless night. When the first gray light of dawn crept across the streets, the wind outside died down. The whispers faded. The old man and woman stood cautiously, stepping toward the door. The town seemed normal: cars, houses, and the distant hum of life. Nothing moving unnaturally. No shadows lurking, no counting voices. But as they reached the edge of the street, he glanced back. Through the trees at the far end, small pale figures emerged. One by one, stepping carefully into the street, keeping the distance, moving in silence. Black eyes fixed on them. Counting silently, lips moving in whispers that only the mind could hear. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. The old man swallowed hard. They never stop, he whispered. The old woman grabbed his hand. We keep moving. Always moving. They walked slowly toward the first house that had signs of life, hoping the normalcy of town could protect them. But even as they approached, the shadows lingered, stretching longer than light should allow, following their every step. Behind them, the forest waited. Patient, eternal, watching, counting. And though they had escaped its immediate grasp, the old man knew that night would return. That night, and every night after it, would remember them. It would wait. And one day, it would find a way back into their lives. The diner man had been right. There was no true escape. Only survival, and hope that the counting never reached 8. Scene 5. The town appeared normal in the daylight, almost peaceful. Children played along the edges of the streets, and neighbors waved at one another over fences. But the old man and his wife moved cautiously, eyes scanning every shadow, ears straining for the faintest whisper. Every movement from the forest's edge felt deliberate, purposeful, as if the trees themselves were calculating, marking their steps. They rented a small room above a gas station at the far end of town. The owner, a middle-aged woman with worn hands and a tight smile, didn't ask many questions. She only offered a key with a quiet, "Stay safe," and left them to their solitude. Inside the room, they locked every door and window. The old woman placed small bundles of herbs in each corner, just as they had done back in the forest cabin. Sage, pine, and a bitter root whose name had long been forgotten, tied into tight knots. She muttered words under her breath that sounded like prayer, or perhaps command. But safety was fleeting. The air in the room felt thick, unnatural. The old man noticed shadows moving beneath the door, long and sinuous, stretching toward them. He grabbed the axe from the corner instinctively, heart hammering, and stood ready for anything. Hours passed. At first, the shadows seemed to retreat with the movement of the sun. Daylight should have been a shield, but it wasn't. The shadows only slowed, waiting. The couple remained in silence, broken only by the sound of whispered words that seemed to come from the walls themselves. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Asterisk by nightfall, the influence of the forest became undeniable. The shadows lengthened unnaturally, slipping through cracks and under doors. At first, it was a faint touch against the skin, a brushing sensation. Then they heard scratching on the walls, a slow, deliberate crawl that moved closer with each hour. Asterisk, the woman whispered, "They're inside town now." They never stopped following. Asterisk, the old man tried to calm her. "They can't come through walls. Not fully. Not here." Asterisk, but the shadows didn't obey the rules of houses, doors, or locks. They seeped through like smoke and coalesced in dark corners. Shapes began to take form within the shadows, small, pale, with limbs too long and faces too thin. Their black eyes gleamed in the dim light, and they moved without sound, pressing closer. Asterisk, the old man gripped his axe. "We can't stay here," he said. Asterisk, "Where do we go?" she asked. Asterisk, he shook his head. "Anywhere but here. Anywhere that's not near the forest." Asterisk, they left in the dead of night, moving silently through the town streets. Every sound, car tires on asphalt, a distant dog barking, the wind through empty alleys made their hearts skip a beat. Behind them, faint movements followed. Shadows detaching from streetlights, crawling along walls, lingering under the glow of neon signs. Asterisk, they reached a small bridge that spanned a river cutting through the town. The water ran black and reflective, and he stared into it, seeing pale figures beneath the surface, moving just under the water as if waiting. One lifted its head slightly, black eyes staring directly up at them. Asterisk, he jerked away. "We need to keep moving," he said, pulling her hand. Asterisk, the figures didn't chase immediately. Instead, they lingered, counting silently from beneath the water. Asterisk. 1, 2, 3. Asterisk, at the far side of town, they discovered a convenience store still open. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, buzzing faintly. Inside, the clerk didn't look up when they entered. The old man and woman moved to the back, taking refuge near stacked shelves. Asterisk, they sat, waiting, listening. Outside, the whispers rose again. Not from the forest this time, but from the shadows that now seemed to infest the town itself. Every alley, every empty yard, every darkened doorway became a source of dread. Asterisk, the woman shivered violently. "They can't be in town, can they?" Asterisk, "They can," he said quietly. "And they are. They adapt. Wherever we go, they find a way." Asterisk, they remained hidden, listening to the faint scratches and whispers. Hours passed. The town slept, but the creatures did not. They watched, patient, unyielding. Occasionally, a pale figure would appear at the end of the street, crouched in shadow, eyes glinting. When he dared to look, it vanished. When she dared to blink, it was gone. Asterisk, by morning, the old couple realized that the town itself was becoming a cage. Every shadow held a threat. Every street corner whispered their names. No one else seemed to notice the creeping horror. They were alone. Asterisk, the old man knew they had to escape the town entirely. They packed lightly, carrying only essentials. The woman tied bundles of herbs along their coats and around their necks. She whispered protective words, soft and fast. almost as if the sound alone could keep the shadows at bay. Asterisk, they left before dawn, walking west, toward roads that led out of the town and into open fields. The forest remained behind them, a dark wall of trees and whispered voices, but the town was already tainted. It would not provide refuge again. Asterisk night fell over the open fields. The moon rose, pale and distant, but the shadows of the forest still reached toward them, stretching unnaturally across the fields like fingers. Figures appeared at the tree line, small, pale, moving in impossible ways, counting silently, methodically. Asterisk, the woman stumbled and fell, crying out. The old man helped her up, scanning the horizon. He saw something approaching, a figure taller than the others, its limbs twisted, face hidden under a mass of hair, moving with a predator's grace. The smaller figures moved around it, forming a circle, waiting. Asterisk, he grabbed her hand. Run, don't stop. Asterisk, they ran across the fields, branches whipping their faces, uneven ground tearing at their feet. Behind them, the sound of dragging limbs and whispering counting rose, echoing through the night air. Asterisk. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Asterisk, the old man realized that the counting had increased, accelerated, as if the creatures were getting closer to whatever they desired. Every step they took was monitored. Every breath recorded. Asterisk, they reached a small farm on the edge of the fields. Lights were on inside. For the first time in hours, they dared to hope. The old man pounded on the door, the woman shaking violently beside him. Asterisk, the door opened slowly, revealing a young man with wide eyes, holding a lantern. What's going on? He asked. Asterisk, they're following us, the woman said breathlessly. From the forest. The cabin. They've been counting. Always counting. Asterisk, the young man hesitated. Followed you? From where? Asterisk, the woods, the old man said. Do you know the forest beyond this town? Asterisk, he nodded cautiously. People don't go there at night. It's old, dangerous. Asterisk, the old man's jaw tightened. They know our names. They count us. They won't stop. Asterisk, the young man stepped back, letting them inside. You need to hide, he said. I'll lock the doors. No thing can get in here. Asterisk, but even as the locks clicked and the lights stayed on, the whispers persisted. They came from just beyond the windows, faint but distinct, carried by the wind through cracks and under the door. Asterisk. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Asterisk, the old man and his wife clung to each other, realizing that for all their running, all their fleeing, there was no real safety. The forest's reach extended far beyond the trees. It was patient, eternal, and the counting would continue. Asterisk, they stayed awake through the night, eyes fixed on the windows, listening to every sound, feeling the presence of the forest pressing in. Even as the sun rose again, the knowledge remained. They had not escaped. Not truly. The creatures were still out there, still watching, waiting for the moment when their patience would pay off. Scene 6. The first light of dawn barely reached the edges of the farm, casting long gray shadows across the field. the old man and his wife had not slept. Every creak of the wooden floor, every rustle outside, sent them into spasms of fear. Even inside the safety of walls and locks, the forest's influence had followed them. The young man who had let them in left early, promising to return with supplies. Alone again, they stared out the windows, watching the tree line. Something moved, their small figures at first, darting between trunks, then larger, slower shapes. Watching, counting. The woman whispered, "They've found us again. They always do." He nodded silently, gripping the axe that had become a constant companion. The smell of wet earth and rot was heavier now, seeping in through cracks in the walls. It was no longer just the forest, they were coming for the town. The people, the structures themselves. By mid-morning, the air was thick with an unnatural mist that crept across the fields, rolling toward the farmhouse like living water. The old man watched from the window as the shapes emerged, slowly at first, then faster. Figures pale, limbs too long, eyes black and reflective, moved as one toward the house. The whispering came again, now clear enough to follow. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10. The old man prepared himself. "We have to face them," he said. "We can't keep running forever." The woman clutched his arm. "We'll die if we do." They won't stop, he interrupted. "Better here, together, than alone somewhere else." They barricaded the doors, tying beams and furniture across every entrance. The walls groaned under the weight of approaching forces, shadows pressing against them. Outside, the figures moved with unnatural coordination. Some dragged themselves on all fours, others crawled upright but bent at grotesque angles. All of them watched, counting, waiting for the precise moment to strike. The first impact came mid. The windows shattered outward, as if the forest itself had slammed them. Shards of glass flew into the room. Small, pale hands reached through, scratching, scraping. The woman screamed, ducking behind a table. The old man swung the axe into the nearest hand. The fingers collapsed like smoke, leaving only a chill in the air. But more hands followed. Dozens of them, writhing, climbing, reaching. They fought desperately. Every swing of the axe struck nothing solid, or merely phased through a shadowy figure, leaving their bodies intact, but the air around him cold and heavy. The whispers rose, a cacophony of voices counting higher and higher. 11, 12, 13. The woman bolted for the back door, trying to escape to the barn. The old man followed. Outside, the mist thickened, obscuring the ground. Shadows coalesced into forms taller than men, moving impossibly fast. Trees bent unnaturally, branches slashing toward them. They reached the barn, slamming the door. Inside, the smell of hay mixed with rot and wet earth. Shadows pressed against the wooden walls, moving like liquid. From above, they could hear scraping. The figures were not limited to the ground. They climbed, hung from rafters, pressed against the ceiling. The old man whispered, "We can't fight them all. We need to hide." They crawled into a small loft above the barn floor, pulling the ladder up behind them. For a few moments, it seemed they were alone. Silence. Asterisk. Then the whispering returned, louder, as if coming from every corner of the barn at once. Asterisk. 14, 15, 16, 17. Asterisk. A shadow detached from the floor, elongated unnaturally, stretching toward the loft. It passed through the wall, reaching for them. The old man swung the axe, but it passed straight through. The woman shrieked. Asterisk. Close your eyes, he said. Don't look at them. Don't give them what they want. Asterisk. They pressed themselves into the corner, eyes squeezed shut. The whispering intensified. The loft trembled under the weight of unseen pressure. Dust fell from the rafters. Then, for a moment, it was silent. Asterisk. A single figure emerged from the shadows. Taller than any man, with a mass of tangled hair and limbs that twisted impossibly. Its black eyes locked on theirs. It moved closer, dragging smaller figures behind it. Each step was accompanied by the counting. Asterisk. 18, 19, 20. Asterisk. The old man understood they were patient. Their counting was a ritual, building anticipation, preparing to claim. The air thickened, making it hard to breathe. Time itself seemed to slow, stretching each heartbeat into an eternity. Asterisk. Suddenly, the shadows surged, flooding the loft. He felt cold fingers brush his skin, grip his arm. He swung the axe blindly, striking nothing but air. The woman screamed, clawing at the nearest figure. It passed through her hands, leaving a sensation of ice. Then nothing. Asterisk. The tall figure reached for them, looming closer, and whispered that's voice deep, almost inside his mind. Asterisk. You cannot leave. You belong, forever. Asterisk. He realized the truth. The forest's reach was limitless. It wasn't bound to trees, or cabins, or roads. It followed, persistent, patient, eternal. The counting would never stop. Asterisk. The loft walls groaned, bending as the shadows pressed. The floor beneath them creaked and cracked. A final surge of figures spilled into the space, surrounding them completely. The old man held his wife close, the axe useless in their hands, and waited. Asterisk. Time seemed to dissolve. The whispers counted endlessly, overlapping, merging into a single rhythm that drummed inside his skull. Asterisk. 21, 22, 23. Asterisk. The world darkened. Shapes pressed against them from all sides, cold and wet. The air vibrated with the whispers, the counting, the intent. He realized they would never escape, never see sunlight without the forest's shadow lingering. Asterisk. And then he felt something strange. The figures paused. The counting slowed. A faint, cold wind blew through the loft. Asterisk. But the forest never forgot. Its patient, eternal gaze lingered even as the shadows retreated into the corners, back into walls, beneath floors. It left a presence behind, a lingering awareness that would never leave. Asterisk. The old man and woman clung to each other, trembling. The axe,